Today's first episode of Season 2 of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a modern campaign agency dedicated to using data-driven grassroots organising to build winning campaigns and make the world a better place. Whether you're in business, issue-based campaigns or an organisation driving change in your community, Dunn Street develops strategies to overcome challenges by connecting people that share the same values and organises them to achieve common goals from the ground up. To find out how Dunn Street can partner with you and your organisation, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Hello and welcome back to another season of Socially Democratic. I'm not going to wish you all a Happy New Year. I'm with Larry David on that. It's a little bit late for that. But we do have an exciting year ahead of podcasting with another season of really interesting and cool, diverse range of guests from both home and overseas. And in particular, in the coming months, obviously, we have the United States Democratic primaries finally getting underway. And we'll be recording a bunch of podcasts following each of those major ballots, including the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire First in the Nation primary, and some of the other primaries, and leading up to the big one, Super Tuesday. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, we've got a whole bunch of other great guests coming on over the next 12 months. So stay tuned, and thanks for tuning back in again to this season. Today's episode is in conjunction with the Chifley Research Centre and Australian Labour International. A couple of weeks back, I spoke with the Tasmanian Leader of the opposition, Labor's Rebecca White. And Rebecca spoke about her time growing up in regional Tassie, her entry into state politics, which I found really interesting, and then sort of talked a bit more about contemporary Tasmanian politics and the state of the economy and some of the things that drive the economy and what her vision is for improving the great state of Tasmania if she is and her term is to be elected at the next state election. She also talked a bit about the relationship with the Greens Party and her strong views on them, and also what it's like to campaign under the Hare-Clarke electoral system, which is very unique to our politics here in Australia, similar to the similar system that they have in the ACT. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget the podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Stitcher. And if you're an Apple Podcast user, please give us a rating and leave a review. And to follow all the updates about the podcast, just follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. Let's get to this week's episode. Okay, we're taping this one on a Saturday afternoon. We're in Sydney at the Chifley Research Centre's conference towards 2022. And I'm joined by the leader of the Tasmanian Labor Party, Rebecca White. Welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thank you very much.
We're both a long way from home to do this.
We are.
But it's great that you can join us now. One of the other podcast episodes we're going to be putting up, which you just did maybe a couple of hours ago with Ed Husick, Nick Rees and Michelle Myers, was talking about Labor and the working class, which I'm not going to go over in this podcast because that will be public as well. But I found it interesting that there was a groan when Nick Rees mentioned about what people perceive as who is in the working class. He said that 70% of Australians think they're middle class and only 20% think that they're working class.
Yeah, and that is interesting. And it's funny, isn't it, because we think about having to appeal to the working class, but who are those people? And what do they look like? What kind of jobs are they doing? Where do they live? And do they even identify that way? So we've got a bit of a problem we need to solve first and foremost is actually who are we trying to talk to and do they even identify as that?
Yep.
Because that might be a fundamental flaw in our thinking.
Yeah, I don't know if... I think most people... Well, I would assume this anyway. I think most people who are working class don't want to be working class and that they're trying to get out of the working class. I certainly know, my parents are migrants. They came out to Australia in the 1950s and they were firmly in the working class when they first arrived here. But fast forward to when, young Stephen Donnelly was brought into this world, my parents probably were now ensconced in the middle class. The only people I can think of that want to be in the working class are people who are in the Labor Party and are firmly in the middle class and are looking to try and appeal to those working class values by trying to pitch themselves as being, oh no, I'm working class, because it's cool in the Labor Party.
But I think it is interesting, because I think most people are aspirational, either for themselves or for their children. And so the great thing about Australia is how egalitarian it has been. Whether it still is, I think, is debatable, maybe a topic for a different time. But we feel like we have an opportunity to advance ourselves and our children. So it's probably a time for us to reflect on what language that we use, because working class is probably a subset of people that we think we need to appeal to, who actually don't want to be in that grouping or be called that or classified that way. So I tend to use the phrase working people rather than working class. I think class system, it's not very applicable in Australia. It exists, but people don't like to be grouped that way. No.
Well, let's we'll unpack a bit more of that a little bit later on in the podcast, but let's go back to your roots. Born and raised in Tasmania?
Yeah, yep.
Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like?
I grew up on a farm.
Right.
So I grew up in regional Tassie, and it was a mixed farming enterprise. We had a piggery, a dairy and beef cattle. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in the country. Dad still got the farm with my brother and went through public education. So we lived about 25 k's away from the local school. So used to travel on a bit of a rusty bus on a gravel road to get to our school every day.
Is it still a gravel road?
It's still a gravel road. Parts of it have been sealed now.
What is that Shire doing?
Well, we can talk about local government a different time. But yeah, great. And massive support in the community. Real terrific sense of community.
Yep, give that community a plug. What part of Tasmania is that?
So I grew up in Nugent.
Yep, I have no idea where that is.
About 25 k's out of Sorell.
And I have no idea where that is. Keep going.
Which is about 25 k's out of Hobart. It's about 50 k out of Hobart.
Right, okay, fantastic. And growing up, who were the people that sort of influenced who you are today as a young person? Was it your parents, or was it other people in the community? Or
it was a combination, and I'm very lucky because my community is a bit like a massive family, and I can still go back to the Nugent community, and we've got one community asset, which is the community hall, where the community gathers every Friday. And that's a tradition that's been in place since I was a kid. So it's nice for me to get away from politics and go home and just spend time with people who've always been there for me. But certainly my family been a massive influence on me. My mum and dad have always valued education, so I was very lucky to be encouraged to continue my education. I was the first member of my dad's family to go to university, and that was significant for our community too. He was probably the first person in the community in Nugent to go to uni, and that was followed on through a bunch of kids who came after me who pursued academic or educational opportunities. So I've been heavily influenced by those country connections. And
your Labor values, how were they shaped and formed?
The value of a fair go, I think, is very prominent in the country, and a value of looking after each other is very prominent too. And especially growing up on a farm, so there's a phrase that I use a bit, which was true for every day living on the farm, which was you look after the animals before you look after yourself, or you feed the animals before you feed yourself.
Yep.
And I see that to be the case in politics too, in that you have to look after other people. It is about the collective responsibility that we all have to the greater good. So my values were shaped through my community and by my community, caring for each other, looking out for each other, good times, bad times, whatever it might be. But then through my education as well. You know, through access to information, you get knowledge and you learn about how the world works, and that was certainly very important for me and shaping who I am as a Labor politician.
Can you think of a moment in your life where your journey to become political, was there a lightning bolt moment? Was there a moment where there was some sort of friction and you had to take action? Can you think about when that may have happened?
There wasn't one point in time. There's probably a couple of things very connected to my local community, as I mentioned. The electorate that I now represent is a very big one, and our local members, we've got multi-member electorates, so 5 members, all of them were from the north. Yep. So there was no one really looking out for our interests. So that sort of engaged me in thinking about why are these decisions being taken and why are we missing out. But
how old were you when you started to think about those things?
Early 20s, I'd say, late teenage years, early 20s, when you start to really notice what's going on around you rather than being a bit more entrenched in day-to-day work and study.
Yep.
But my dad had always been very interested in what's happening at the local council level. And then for me, I became particularly engaged around the Your Rights at Work campaign and in action on climate change,
right,
which is a bit sad given we're still in that situation. And the failure of the then Howard government to ratify the Kyoto Protocol and to take the necessary steps as a leader of our country to give effect to action on climate change.
And were you, trying to think, were you at uni at that point during the Work Choices campaign?
Yes. I'd just finished up at university and was in the workforce.
Yep. And was there anything that, when you were thinking about both, the Howard government had a double barrel there, they were both trying to screw over workers and trying to screw over the environment at the same time. Was there an avenue by which you were able to act on those values or the things that were important to you? Was there something you went and did that started that journey?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I was working in hospitality, paying for my way through university, and it was a unionised workplace, and the union was very active. So that had been quite influential in my thinking about industrial relations and obviously the Your Rights at Work stuff. But I also then had an opportunity to work for federal Labor politicians. So for me, that then helped explain a lot of how things worked and how decisions were made. And
who were you working
that was
for?
Duncan Kerr,
Yep.
who is an incredible man and has been an enormous influence on my life and my political journey. And so that was quite a formative time for me in terms of my thinking about how politics can be used to affect structural change and at a population level.
And so you're working for Duncan. When did you think that you wanted to seek public office, and why?
I never did.
A lot of people say that, though, which is surprising when you think about it.
I wanted to be a vet when I was at school and I'm growing up on a farm. I don't suppose that's a surprise to people, but I was active in the local community. There were a couple of different events that I was involved with organising, completely unrelated to politics, but just community activities. And the party recognised that, and it was the party that asked me if I'd be interested to stand at the 2010 state election.
You got headhunted.
But that was about 2008, and I would have been 24 or 5, and I said, no way. So I'd been active in the party, and I was in fact active in Young Labor.
Yep.
But I just saw how hard people worked, and I thought I need more time to think about this. And because they'd asked me so far out from the election, I suppose they had time to work on me. So I did end up taking up the opportunity, and it was primarily because of the point I made earlier that I could see that my community was missing out and that the electorate wasn't being treated particularly fairly, and that a lot of people were being disadvantaged by that because they didn't have anyone who was speaking for them. So I did campaign. I had no profile. I was, fairly inexperienced when it comes to politics, had no money, and at the time I was campaigning, it was basically knocking on doors for nearly a year, every weekend, and then close to the campaign every day.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like to hear that. The electorate that you're the member for, is it Lions?
Yeah.
In the town of Nugent, what's the population of Nugent?
A couple of hundred tops.
Traditionally, Labor voters, National, Liberal.
There's no national presence in Tassie, so I'd say it'd be a bit of a split.
Yep.
But because it's a farming community, small business, people that you'll tend to think they have to vote Liberal.
Yeah.
Because of just the perceptions are, amongst political parties and who they represent. So there's a lot of people that I was able to garner support from who wouldn't traditionally have supported a Labor candidate across the farming communities, across sporting connections that my family and I had.
Yep.
And just through our familial ties to the electorate.
Yeah.
Our family had been there for a long, long time.
Yep.
Never been involved in politics, really. So it was, I think it was probably unlikely that I was going to be elected, and I figured if I wasn't successful, then I'd probably think about running again. But we ran a really strong grassroots campaign, and it was effective. And I think people were looking for a change too. So that was the year that the Labor Party didn't get re-elected as a majority. So there were out of 25 lower house members, there were 10 new ones elected in 2010. So the community was really looking for a bit of a change. So I think people identified in me somebody that could help deliver on that.
Some of the conversations that are happening this weekend here in Sydney at this conference are about how Labor can engage with communities and voters that aren't traditionally the people that we've done a great job of engaging with, and moving them to support Labor governments and Labor policies. I'm always interested when I meet politicians who are from non-traditional Labor backgrounds, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners would be very keen on the insights and the experiences that you have had over your journey about how you've been successful in engaging with people. Obviously, you didn't get elected completely on the back of 100 people from Nugent, but you certainly would have had to have engaged with a lot of rural communities that make up the electorate of Lions for you to get elected. Talk us through about that. What have you found that's been successful?
Yeah, that's been something I've focused on, because for me it speaks to something that's authentic about me and something I deeply care about, which is rural communities and farming communities. And I think people respond to that because they have seen that in my family. I'm lucky that my family is respected in the farming sector. I think it'd be harder if you came from a familial connection that didn't have that same level of respect. So I'm fortunate that's the case. I don't think you can fake that stuff, though, as much as Barnaby Joyce might pretend to be from farming community. He's actually an accountant with a big hat. Yeah. So maybe some people can fake it. But for me in Tasmania too, personalities and connection to community are so vital, and identifying candidates who've got strong, genuine links with their community, who are authentic and who speak with passion and knowledge about the things that community cares about, I think has to be a fundamental part of our strategy, pre-selecting the right people. Yeah. And they might sometimes come from outside the party structure, and that can be a challenge to some people because they like to reward engagement over a long period of time by pre-selecting people, and I respect that too. But if we are serious about engaging people who are outside traditional Labor voting areas, and then we have to think about people who appeal to those people.
You raised an interesting point there, because the pipeline by which both parties identify their candidates that they run for public office, I certainly think the Labor Party pipeline's a hell of a lot more diverse than the Liberal Party pipeline. The Liberal Party pipeline just feels like people who either were solicitors, worked for IPA, or were ex-coppers. Maybe then the Tories could have a crack at us and say they're all either ex-union officials or Labor careerists, but I don't think that's true. And even if you look at the federal parliament right now, we have a lot of diversity, but we need to continue to break that and make that bigger. What do you think what can we do better to open that pipeline for more people from diverse backgrounds across the country to get involved in Labor politics?
We need to go to where they are. I don't think we can expect them to come to our meetings or, policy forums, and it'd be great if lots of people could come and listen to the conversations that we've had today at this conference, but people who are disengaged from politics are never going to show up to these things. So we have to get out to where they are, and we have to be working with the local leaders of the community to identify the talent that we could potentially then engage as candidates. It's going to also require the party structures to be open to that as a concept and willing to pre-select candidates, going through appropriate vetting and processes, and obviously you have to have an alignment of values, and that is fundamentally important. You don't want to have a complete schism within the party. But we also probably need to think a bit more with an open mind, I suppose, about how we engage people who currently aren't engaged, and recognise that they might not fit within the traditional structures that we have within the movement. Can't attend meetings every Thursday month to get their eligibility up so that they can nominate to be a candidate.
Yep.
For some people, that's not possible, but they might still be the best person for the job. So I think we need to enable enough flexibility that you don't lose your best talent, and also recognising that some people have got jobs that make it impossible for them to be announced as a candidate too far out from an election, and sometimes that requires the party to be a bit flexible about the timing of announcements of candidates too, and respect that some people just can't live on nothing. Nobody can live on nothing, while they're going through the process of campaigning.
It's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? I don't think the parties kind of worked it out, because what we wanted to do, I think, was, and I'm speaking as a former party official, there was a view that for a long time there we would pre-select candidates reasonably close to the election, like normally within a 12-month time frame, perhaps only 6 months out. I don't know what your experience was like. But then we flipped it to say, no, we need to pre-select candidates much further out to allow them time to start to build a profile in the local community. But that's expensive because while they're doing that, they probably are still holding down a job.
Yeah. If they're able to, because obviously if you some jobs don't enable you to have that flexibility.
Correct. So if you're a public service servant, for example,
or even in the private sector, if you're an employee and your employer doesn't agree with your choices, then your job security might be put at risk.
Yep.
So there's other challenges, but it's a real conundrum. I accept what you're saying.
Yeah, which then my natural solution is then to basically pay those candidates, or somehow subsidise the work that they're doing. But money doesn't grow on trees. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to where we are now. You're the leader of the Tasmanian Labor Party. You've already had one election, which was in the start of
2018.
2018.
Yep.
This last 2 years feels like it's been 3 or 4 decades.
Yep.
I keep on saying that the federal election was last year, and no, it wasn't.
It feels like it was, but it was this year.
It literally was this year.
Yeah.
But talk us through your experience in leading up to that campaign. That was your first campaign. What are because you won't have another election until probably 2022?
Yeah.
What were the teachable moments that you found as the leader of the party going into that campaign, and then thinking about getting ready for the next election?
Okay, so the party organisation was in pretty good shape. So we had our candidates pre-selected a good 8 months out, and everyone understood the strategy. I think for us, any advice I'd give is make sure that you've got your policy framework developed in good time so that you can explain it to people.
Yep.
And I've seen that again in a federal election where announcements were rolled out quite late, and it didn't enable time for people to process that, or even for people to know about it. There were some amazing ideas that people didn't even know were being offered up. And that's a learning that I took from our election, I think also observed in the federal election. So making sure you've got your policy framework developed so that you can actually get out and campaign on it and have some core messages that you're campaigning around. And we did our very best to do that in 2018, but despite having the structures there, I think we had a reasonably new state secretary. I was a new leader, first term in opposition. So the first 2 years of that, the party was just trying to figure itself out.
Yeah.
So it was always going to be a bit of a challenge to turn things around in one term for us. And going from the resources of government to the lack of resources in opposition meant that we just didn't have the capability internally to be able to have all of the systems firing at the right time. With a bit more time now, I feel like we've much further advanced, and that's going to be of great help to us.
I want to talk to you about those policies, in a moment, but just paint the picture for our mainland listeners about Tasmania right now, the state of the economy. What is life like for Tasmanians under a Liberal government? Well,
Tasmanians are being told that they've never had it better, and the Treasurer actually uses a phrase that we're in a golden age, which is a bold phrase to use, I think, given that Tasmania, 1 in 4 people live in poverty, that the underemployment rate is the worst in the country, and a lot of people are just piecing together part-time work. You know, I talked to a guy, Luke, who works as a cleaner at a school. He does, 20-odd hours a week doing that, and then he goes to another job working security, has to sleep in his car between those shifts because there's no point in him driving home and coming back again. Still can't make a 40-hour week on 2 jobs, working irregular hours, and it's damaging his health, damaging his family relationships, and his story is more and more common. Housing affordability is a real challenge in Tasmania, which is not something that Tasmanians have had to deal with previously. You know, we've copped lower wages because the cost of living has been less, but it's becoming more unaffordable in Tasmania now, and the housing prices have gone up. Hobart is the least affordable place to rent a house in the country.
What's driving that now, do you think?
There's been a massive shift out of the housing market into the sharing economy. So a lot of houses that used to be available for rent are now being listed with Airbnb or stays. And the tourism industry is very strong in Tasmania. So, you know, there are parts of the economy that are doing really well. But not everybody's feeling the benefits of that. And people are feeling quite resentful about that. And they hear the rhetoric from the government, whether you be a retail business who's hearing from the government that retail trade is, really strong, and they're going, we're not seeing customers come in our door. Retail trade is strong because people are buying groceries, putting food on the table, and they're paying for fuel to keep their car going. They're not necessarily in the shops buying up to, put clothes on their kids and Christmas presents under the tree. So there's a real disconnect between the rhetoric and what's happening, and this is where I suppose it comes back to what do we measure when we assess the health of an economy. Because if you're just measuring some of these economic indicators, you're missing measuring the social indicators that right now in Tasmania are going backwards.
And people are just falling through the cracks.
Yeah, people are falling through the cracks. We've got more people waiting for surgery in our hospitals than we've ever had, record high levels. More people waiting for social and affordable housing than we've ever had. And we've got some seriously big problems in our education system in terms of educational attainment. And if we aren't addressing the fundamentals like that in underemployment and unemployment, then people aren't going to be able to take advantage of these good times. And that's the real frustration I have in opposition, watching what the government's not doing in terms of using reasonably prosperous times for our economy to invest in the structural changes that are required to help people have a good quality of life.
And so tell us a bit about what you and your opposition team are looking at in terms of addressing some of these structural problems.
So the obvious one for me is looking at how we provide a pathway to employment for people, and that's secure, meaningful work. TAFE is a key component of how we deliver on that. We've seen a cut in apprenticeships over the last 5 years under Liberal government, both because of federal policies and state policies. And we're seeing a fly in, fly out workforce. So there's work available in Tasmania, but Tasmanians aren't getting that work.
What type of work that you have these sort of FIFOs, whatever they're called?
We're seeing, particularly in building construction.
Right.
So that the gaps at the moment in terms of where the jobs are, tourism, hospitality, building construction, aged care, disability care, and some in the agricultural sector as well. The government's known about all of these things, and what they should be doing is putting courses on that align with industry needs. So people are getting clear pathways to employment. They're not doing that. But also they could be using the levers they have available as a government. So mandating apprenticeship and traineeship on projects that are funded with public money or through their own government business enterprises. So, Hydro and others that might be known to people who could make sure that they're putting on apprentices and trainees. Making sure that we are looking after local content, so small businesses getting a part of that pie, making sure that when we put tenders out, they're not so big that local companies aren't able to bid for them because they haven't got that capability. So they're all within the remit of government to do something about, and they've failed to do that. We would look to reintroduce some of those initiatives so that we could actually provide opportunities for Tasmanians and Tasmanian businesses. And then you think about some of the other problems that are plaguing Tasmania at the moment, housing. So we need to build more houses. That creates employment for people. We need to be training people in Tasmania so they can do that work. Government interest rates have never been lower. that the cost of borrowing capital is pretty cheap compared to what it has historically been. Government should be investing in those sorts of social infrastructure programs because it provides jobs for people, but it puts a roof over people's head. People aren't going to get better. They're not going to find work if they've got no permanent place to stay. So a housing first approach has to be a priority if you're really going to tackle some of those other challenges across the community. And the other thing that we're seeing in Tasmania that's presenting more and more is challenges around mental health, and a government that's not seriously taking this on. And, we've got an initiative to put mental health workers in every single school because we understand the prevalence of mental ill health in our young people is far too high. Mm-hmm. Like it's just dangerously high. So we need to be providing resources and support to people early and also make sure they've got supports in community too. We've got people who've waited 8 days in our emergency departments for mental health care because they can't get a bed. We've got coroner's reports who've handed to government, and it's pretty awful, but where people have hung themselves in the waiting room of the hospital because they can't get a bed. And yet we've got a government that's still pursuing cuts to health, cutting beds from hospitals for mental health patients. And it's unconscionable to me that any minister could get a coroner's report like that and then decide to pursue cuts in an area where you've already had people die.
It's just such classic Tory politics, and just hearing you before saying about, that people, we're in reasonably prosperous times in Tasmania with our economy and we should be making these structural reforms, but it's just so classic of the Tories to just sit on their hands and just ride this economic wave whilst... Yeah. It happened in Western Australia as well, and, arguably it happened in the 60s under, the Menzies era. Do you get a chance to, we've got a number of really good state and territory Labor governments around the country. Do you get a chance to travel around and talk with your interstate colleagues about some of the projects that they're doing? And, from an organising perspective, everything that we do in campaigns, we live in a postmodern world. Nothing is an original idea. We're stealing from the best, right? And that's what we should continue to do from a campaign perspective. I wonder from a policy development and a sort of a strategic look at how we can address some of the problems that you're having in Tasmania. Do you get around and have a chat to some of your other colleagues? What have you seen from those travels that you're thinking, yes, that's something that we need to adopt here in Tasmania? Yeah,
definitely. So we've got a really close relationship with Victorian Labor, and they've done some great stuff around TAFE training that we're looking to use in our policy thinking. And energy is also something that's very big across the nation, but for Tasmania it's one of our key advantages because we're a renewable energy state. Learning from other states that have produced hydrogen strategies and thinking about how we can apply that in the Tasmanian context. We've got a Liberal government in Tasmania that's been very slow to take advantage of our renewable energy opportunities and has left it entirely to the private sector without thinking about how the state could benefit from those advantages. I've also had the opportunity to talk a lot with New Zealand and particularly interested in their wellbeing budget and the approach they're taking about measuring the other things in a society that help you understand if it's healthy or prosperous, not just looking at the economic indicators, which is, I think, particularly relevant to Tasmania. So we do have good relationships with all of our interstate counterparts, but certainly the strongest relationship would be Victorian Labor just because they're our closest neighbour.
Just across the water.
Yeah.
How do Tasmanians, this is not even a political question, this is more of a social question, how do Tasmanians view mainlanders? I've always wondered, we're a big country, and it was mentioned in the session that you were in before, talking about the diversity and also sometimes the polarisation that happens in Australia. You go to far north Queensland and the different divisions that exist in Queensland. We had Senator Anthony Chisholm on a couple of months ago, and he was talking about the schisms within Queensland politics, let alone nationally. How do Tasmanians view the rest of us mainlanders?
I think that Tasmania tends to ignore you a lot.
Okay, good. That's nice.
We just get on and do our own thing, and Tasmania can be a bit insular like that, and that we're quite happy just doing our own thing. We don't have a lot of national media infiltration in Tasmania in terms of the broadsheets, the national print media or television. We're quite happy watching our news and reading our own papers. So I think the average Tasmanian would think we got it pretty good. Tassie's a pretty brilliant place to live, and we're very proud of being Tasmanian. And mainlanders are just a bit of a pest.
Fair enough. Well, you're very right to ignore us because, Brisbane did ignore Tasmania during the 1982 Commonwealth Games when they made that map of Australia on the...
Well, I have to say, I did talk
to
Peter as well, the opposition leader in South Australia, because their little logo that they've got for the South Australian Tourism Campaign does not have Tasmania on it.
Shame.
It is shameful.
Mally, what are you doing? That's one of his very first things he'll have to do when he
Well, he was wearing his little badge when I saw him yesterday, and I did point it out to him again.
Very good. Well, then internally looking about the politics of Tasmania, obviously the last federal election we lost the seats of Bass and Braddon. We lost as many seats in Tasmania as we did in Queensland, and obviously everyone wanted to cut Queensland out of the out of existence in Australia. You said in your opening remarks in the session on Labor and the working class that Tasmania, you regarded Tasmania as a Labor state. You've always had a very strong Green presence in Tasmanian politics as well, not necessarily just the political party, but also just the general sort of environmental politics. And currently we have a Tory government there. Talk to us about the people in Bass and Braddon, and what do you think? I know there's no silver bullet or one answer to why people flip their vote, but generally speaking, why do you think that they may not have returned Labor MPs in those two seats at the federal election?
I think there are two reasons. One is economic uncertainty. I think people felt their economic security might have been at risk. I think they were wrong to think that, but that was what they believed. And the other was a campaign that was run successfully by the Liberal Party that a vote for Labor was a vote for the Greens, even though in the federal election context that's not the case, and neither is it in the state context, but it was effective because people, particularly in the north of the state, hate the Greens.
Right.
So
why in the north? Tell me why in the north of the state?
It's home to more traditional industries. It's more of a private business culture and mentality. The south of the state is where all the public service jobs are primarily based, where the north of the state is where private enterprise and industry has been able to flourish because of access to ports and access to natural resources. So the demographic in the north and the northwest of the state is more what you might think of it like a blue-collar worker, I suppose, as opposed to a white-collar worker. They don't like the Greens because they think they're going to shut all their industries down and they'll lose their jobs. Mm-hmm. And they want to have the knowledge that whoever is in power is going to continue to support them to keep living the way they currently are.
Right. And essentially that would be your mission leading into the 2022 campaign.
We need to demonstrate that we're a safe pair of hands with the economy, that people will have economic security and under a Labor government, and they won't have to worry about that. But at the same time, we are in a better place as a Labor movement to tackle some of those other challenges that their families are also facing, whether it be education, health and housing.
Yep.
And that's the way that we have to communicate all of our policies. Yeah.
You said at the Tasmanian Labor Party conference earlier this year that you would not enter into an alliance if your government, or if you were to be elected into government, you wouldn't enter into an alliance with the Greens political party. Talk me through your thinking of how you came to that view.
Well, it's pretty simple, really. I think Tasmania's had quite a patchy history when it comes to political parties of both stripes entering into arrangements with the Greens for support on the floor of the House or even in Cabinet. And usually it ends in despair with that political party being sent to the opposition benches for a while, which is what's happened in all three cases where the Greens have entered a coalition arrangement with a party, the Liberal or Labor. I made that statement clearly because we need to be able to demonstrate that we are a safe pair of hands with the economy and that we will be able to support people to have a good quality of life and that will support them in the job that they have, and that the Greens, and I've seen this, undermine that confidence every time they have a chance. They're incredibly ideological in Tasmania, I think across the nation, have a purist approach to issues that they are campaigning around, and there's no meeting you in the middle or meeting people halfway. And that's untenable for me. It leaves people behind. The Labor Party very firmly of the view that there has to be a just transition for people if you're going to make changes. And change is inevitable. Markets change and governments have to assist communities and industries to adapt when that occurs. But you can't just turn the tap off overnight and expect people to deal with it.
Which is what the Greens want to do.
That's what the Greens want to do.
Is there an added layer of difficulty in doing that with the Hare-Clarke system that you have for your elections in Tasmania, which is the same in the ACT? And for those out there that don't know what Hare-Clarke is, explain that and how that works.
So in Tasmania, we've got 5 electorates and there are 5 members for each electorate. So it's a multi-member electorate system. And so that means there are 25 members in the House of Assembly, which is where government is formed. So you need to get to 13 to win government. And so Hare-Clarke also means that in those electorates, so the Labor Party pre-selects 5 candidates for each seat. So you're campaigning against your own party, you're campaigning against the Liberal Party, campaigning against any other parties that might also be campaigning in that seat. So it can become a bit of a blood sport at times. You try and manage it the best you can, but it can become a bit of a challenge. But I don't believe that the statements that I've made make it any more difficult for us. In fact, I think it's important for us to make those clear statements so the electorate understands that a vote for Labor is a vote for Labor.
Yep.
It's not a vote for a Labor and a something else, because people want certainty and we need to be able to demonstrate our commitment to that. So that's not just a statement at a conference, it's actually then our actions in the Parliament and our actions in community supporting those people and demonstrating Labor values of looking after working people, making sure essential public services are supporting people to access housing, health and education, and ensuring that we're thinking about the future. And that's the challenge that we discussed this morning as well, is how do you reconcile the differences across the movement from the very progressive end to the more traditional end.
Yeah, no, it's such a challenge for Labor, and I'm sure the Tories have this same problem as well. But it's trying to keep everyone, as many people as you possibly can, in that big tent that is 50% plus one to help you win those elections. And I don't think when I was talking to Michael Gunner on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, same challenges that they have. The Northern Territory is just as diverse as Victoria or Queensland, or.
Yeah.
But what do you think is the commonality that you can link all of those communities together to say that the Labor Party and Rebecca White, I share the values that party has, and that's why I'm going to go vote for them? What do you think is that thing that can link them all?
I think it's community building.
Right.
I think which is what I'm most passionate about, is community development. It comes from my history growing up in a community that did just that. And I know Tasmanians are very proud about being Tasmanian, and they want to protect that reputation too. And the things that we're very good at include renewable energy, prime ministries and tourism. So they're our strengths. How do we help provide capacity for people to take advantage of that, which is the skills and training component? It's the community building is a fairly broad phrase, I suppose, but it's the one thing that links everybody. It's the pride in place and the strength of their connection to community. And the Labor Party is best placed to be able to assist in that endeavour. And I believe we can do that through talking about, maintaining people's economic security and employment, but also thinking about how we help their kids and grandkids, training through TAFE, for instance, and the VET pathway, and looking after their mental health and taking that seriously along with all of the other challenges we have, because I'm not sure yet whether we'll name it up in the same way around like a wellbeing budget, but that really interests me, how we can measure those things across the community about how you develop community and make it better and a better place to live for people, linking that into your budget and then funding initiatives that actually deliver on those goals.
To conclude, I was talking to some of your staff and I said, what does Rebecca like to do outside of politics? And they said, you like horse riding. Where did that come from? Obviously, you are from regional Tasmania, so I'm sure there's a connection there. Yeah. But talk us through the love for horse riding. And while I do that, the second question is going to be, I need you to list your top 5 horse films of all time? Because I'm assuming that you might be across that, but you don't need to answer that one straight away. But where did the connection for horse riding come? And do you get a chance to jump on a horse now that you're the leader of the Labor Party?
I haven't ridden my horse for a while, unfortunately, but it came from growing up on the farm and needing a horse to move stock around. So it was a means of transport, really. But my mum had also had a very long engagement with horses through her childhood, so it was both because of mum's love of horses, but also our farm needed horses to work the stock. And I do love horses. I still have a horse, but I haven't done very much riding lately, unfortunately.
What is the horse's name?
His name is Hugh.
Hugh?
Yeah.
I like animals with just, human names as opposed to Lucky or, Mitzi or something. Hugh, that's great. Okay, right, top 5 horse films of all time.
Do you know, I couldn't list 5.
Really?
I don't know. I want to watch Ride Like a Girl.
Right.
I haven't seen that one yet, so I'm looking forward to that.
I can throw some others. I remember as a young bloke when Phar Lap came out in 1983. I thought that film was amazing.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh, really?
No.
That's before the Australian film industry got killed by the Liberal Party. The Man from Snowy River, classic.
Oh, yeah, The Man from Snowy River. Yeah, for sure.
Seabiscuit.
Yeah, Seabiscuit's lovely. Could you perhaps put in there maybe Shrek? Because Donkey's not a horse, but he's pretty cool.
Black Stallion. National Velvet. That was in 1944, a little bit before both our times. The Horse Whisperer.
Oh, The Horse Whisperer.
That was huge.
Yeah, I read the book. I don't know if I watched the movie. I probably did.
War Horse.
Oh, War Horse was also very good, yes.
What about Flicker? 2006.
Oh, Flicker. Classic. Yes.
See, look at that. There's heaps out there. Moondance Alexander. I've never heard of that. I don't know what that is. International Velvet. I reckon that might have been the sequel.
To National Velvet?
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly.
There was Flicker 2. There you go. And the remake of Seabiscuit. Let It Ride? What's that about?
Don't know.
Anyway. And The Return to Snowy River. Oh, my God, they did 3, man. I didn't know they did 3 for The Man from Snowy Rivers. Right, anyway. Okay, out of those ones, what would be the number 1 of all time for you?
That is a good question. I like Seabiscuit.
The original or the new one?
Oh, God. Must have been the new one. I think.
Can I just say on behalf of all of the listeners of Socially Democratic, 1, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us. 2, I know it's a long way away, but best of luck with the campaign.
Thank you.
We really hope that you can join the rest of your Labor colleagues at COAG and continue to fight for Tasmanians, and that we have a Labor state in the very near future.
Thank you. I look forward to that too.
Cheers.